The Forest Service was very nearby, and one day we went and did like what we call a line dig. It's using tools to remove fuel down to bare minimum soil, and this can stop the advance of oncoming wildland fire, right? So I'm 18 or something like this, and I'm out there swinging this tool with these Forest Service guys, and I'm like, man, this is really fun. It has the team aspect, right? You all got to work together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It has like the doing something bigger than myself, which I really enjoyed, and it had this like physical challenge, which I was like all in. I was like, man, this is awesome. Like, that's everything I want, and I'm outside every day.
You're listening to an Apex Mindset episode of the RCN Podcast, where we learn from inspiring individuals who push the boundaries to reach extreme levels of success. Apex Mindset. Elevate your life. On this Apex Mindset episode of the RCN Podcast, the wildland firefighter and Hotshot crew superintendent, Ben Strahan.
I work for the United States Forest Service, run what's called a Hotshot crew. We get compared to like a special operations team in the military. We're considered elite in that way. Fire moves uphill. We have fire down below, people above. It's not a good place to be. I run over to go check it out, and I'm looking down the hill, the smell, I can feel the heat. I'm like, it's time to go. And I just activate, like, you need to get off the hill. They're struggling to leave. I finally convince them to leave, but as the fire is cranking up this hill through this drainage, and it's like licking over the top of us, and I'm pulling people off the ground, trying to convince them to go. And I'm just like, what the fuck, man? My job is no longer fighting fire and like just doing the things I love. It's about making sure other people don't die constantly. Mother Nature is super unpredictable. Some of the largest catastrophic fires in our lifetimes, or even some in history, right? California in 2020 had a 1 million acre fire.
Yeah.
Just mind-blowing. When I started fighting fire, they were 20,000 acres with a large fire. So we're seeing fires across the landscape that are much more devastating and much more catastrophic. To come to these solutions, I had to circle back and ask myself the why. Is it still the thing that I set out to be to start? And I answered that yes. The reason why I was doing something was still present. I just had to find myself first. If you can find your true authenticity, it's like moths to a light. Like, people want to be around that energy so bad. And once I was able to tap into that as a person, things became much easier in my job.
Warning. This podcast episode contains discussion and reflections on difficult topics around mental health, trauma, and suicide. While we intend to create a safe and empathetic space for dialogue, we acknowledge that this episode might not be suitable for everyone. This episode is intended for informational and awareness purposes only and should not substitute professional medical advice or therapy. The hosts and guests are not mental health professionals, but individuals sharing their personal experiences.
All right. Welcome to the Apex Mindset Podcast here on RCN. We're excited today to dig into the story and the fun conversation here with Ben. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, and you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You know, we've seen some videos about what you do, and honestly, it's impressive, it's mind-blowing, and I think it's a story that maybe a lot of people don't hear about often. So we would love to start, before we even dig into your current role and everything, we'd love to start all the way back. We love to dig into the story of our guests, you know, where they grew up, kind of what life was like, and take us on the journey on how you got into what you do now.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate the question. Yeah, so I grew up in California. I'm a California boy. I've never lived in any other state. First 8 years of my life were in Southern California. My folks were both from there, except for my pops. He kind of grew up in like the Midwest, Arkansas kind of area, and then moved out to California, Southern California, when he was getting out of high school. My folks wanted to have more space, as they had 4 kids. I'm the oldest of 4, and which it gets pretty crowded in a small, like, you know, suburb community with 4 kids, you know. And so anyways, They moved us up to Northern California in a town called Garden Valley. And Garden Valley is roughly in between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe. Kind of like an hour in each direction if you go an hour west from Tahoe or an hour east from Sacramento. So in this kind of in the foothills, or actually it is in the foothills for sure. Mountain community, very, very, very small, very rural, very quiet, very awesome place to live. It's currently where I live now, actually, after moving off of what we call the hill for a short stint of time. But yeah, I grew up here, since 8 years old. I call this my home. That's a really cool pace of life. I went to a very small high school. My graduating class was something around like 60 people or something like this. So it was pretty tiny. So you knew everybody, right? Which can be awesome and annoying at the same time. It's hard to get in trouble when everybody knows who you are.
Yeah.
So, but as a parent, man, you actually appreciate that quite a bit, because there's like the security of the community watching over all the children, which is really, really kind of awesome.
Yeah, if something's going on, you're going to hear about it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, and just like anybody else, to kind of get into like kind of the career aspect of what I'm doing is you're growing up and don't really know what you want to do. I was always the kid where someone asked me like, hey, what do you want to do with your life? I'm like, dude, I have no idea, man. I want to do something bigger than myself. I like team sports. I was playing soccer and running track and played baseball, did all that type of stuff. And I really liked that aspect of working within a team to complete a common goal or achieve something together. But I also really like to push myself physically. And growing up, I didn't really feel all that intelligent. I look back at that now and that's kind of a silly thing to think, but I personally thought I had roughly 3 options. I could either go into construction, I could get into logging because logging was still a thing when I was a kid, or I can become a firefighter. And obviously, you're going to choose the hero thing, right? The hero thing, whatever.
Well, and out of curiosity too, what did your family do? Like, what did your dad do?
Totally. Yeah. Great question. My dad worked for water agencies as like an operations specialist type of person. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was a librarian for the school, did a lot of like volunteer work,
Cool.
But she was primarily a stay-at-home mom. But my grandfather, got my dad, God bless his heart. When I was a kid, I didn't see much of him, honestly. He had 4 children. And in many ways, I remember my mom telling me he was working 3 jobs at once and also trying to go to school, A young man growing up, that seems, you don't really get or really understand what is happening, right? So there was some potential like struggle with my self-animosity towards him in some way, even though my dad is like, he's always been one of the best humans I've ever met. This very kind, very loving person. To get to the point of the question, like, what did my parents do? I had access to my grandparents a lot. In fact, when they're all from Southern California. As soon as we moved up to Northern California, they trailed, a year or 2 later and moved up here. So my grandfather was in the military. So there was a lot of access to the service industry, serving the community, doing something bigger than yourself, that type of stuff. Then going through high school, him and I started a business together called Ben and Ted's Grand Works, which was like this like super small like handyman business.
That's awesome.
That is really cool.
I was just along for the ride in the first parts of the years, but we did a lot of really cool stuff. It gave me a lot of cool skills, and like I could repair sinks and plumbing and electrical and just random jobs,
Yeah.
So that's really, really awesome. But yeah, so I was inspired to become, or I leaned into becoming a firefighter basically. My school was really great. They had a bunch of trade type of education programs, ROP programs, and one of them was firefighting. So I took these ROP programs, which prepared you and gave you basic certifications to enter the workforce right out of high school. And because we live in a rural area next to federal owned land and property, the Forest Service was very nearby, and one day we went and did like what we called a line dig. It's using tools to remove fuel down to bare minimum soil, and this kind of can stop the advance of oncoming wildland fire, right? So I'm 18 or something like this, and I'm out there swinging this tool with these Forest Service guys, and I'm like, man, this is really fun. It has the team aspect, right? You all got to work
Yeah.
together.
Mm-hmm.
It has like the doing something bigger than myself, which I really enjoyed, and it had this like physical challenge, which I was like all in. I was like, man, this is awesome. Like that's everything I want. And I'm outside every day. So I kind of got sort of recruited in a way. And 2 days after graduating high school, I had a job with the Forest Service. And this is where I am now. So going into my 23rd year. I work for the United States Forest Service, and I had some bumps along the way of like trying to figure out if this was going to be my right path, which maybe we get into a little bit later. But I've dedicated my career path in this, and specifically what I do is I run what's called a Hotshot crew, and most people don't know what that is, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't really like the comparison so much, but it's the comparison that is often used for it in regards to us. So I'm just going to use it as we get compared to like a special operations team in the military.
Yeah.
We're highly trained. Our physical fitness is super high. Our qualifications are crazy. We're like a force multiplier in many ways when we come into a fire arena. And I run what's called a hotshot crew. So I'm a superintendent of a hotshot crew. So we're considered elite in that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're like the SWAT. You know, there's all the firefighters, but then there's the special crew that when something intense is going on, that's who gets called on.
Yeah, absolutely. We besides aviation, we're the most requested resource nationally. During the wildland season. So
20 years has given you quite the perspective, I'm sure. What kind of change have you seen in that time?
The easiest way to answer this, the biggest change that I've seen is in myself, honestly, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think a lot of people are interested in like what's the wildland change. I mean, from that perspective, we've seen some of the largest catastrophic fires in our lifetimes, or even some in history, right? California in 2020 had a 1 million acre fire.
Yeah.
So, which is just mind blowing. When I started fighting fire, they were 20,000 acres with a large fire. So we're seeing fires across the landscape that are much more devastating and much more catastrophic. It's a multi-pronged approach of like, what's the cause is. That's another interesting question, right? Like, is it climate change? Is it, fuels management, right? Like these types of things. It's all of those. We have people moving closer and closer into these rural areas, which is making harder and harder to protect some of these or manage some of these landscapes. And also when you get big fires, they're impacting what we call the wildland urban interface much quicker. I think climate change in and of itself is just always changing, so we've had, besides last year and this year, at least in California, we had some very dry years, almost like seven or so years in a row where there's this trend of dryness. So that didn't help. And then it's been the fuels management problem, like being able to treat the land and use fire to kind of clean up the landscape, or even just do mechanical thinning or hand thinning or whatever it is, and also like the decrease in the logging industry also is another impact that people like to talk about is real. Like we're not doing enough. There's not enough ability for us to manage as much land as with the amount of people that we have. For a long time, we were having increased fire behavior. And so we needed the people who typically did the fuels management work were the firefighters, but they would also be fighting fire. And so we would have a season, but now we don't really have a season anymore. We have a year-long fire problem, and we're still trying to rely on the firefighters to manage the amount of fuels treatment that needs to be done. So those are some of the changes, but then you have, it's Mother Nature is super unpredictable. Like we're having a record year in Northern California right now with snowpack.
Yeah.
So, it's been crazy. And you guys are in Washington, right?
No, Boise, Idaho. Yeah.
Boise. What's your winter been like?
It's been cold. We haven't seen a ton of snow, and yet I want to say it was like 4 or 5 years ago they had Snowmageddon. My family wasn't out here yet but when we came, they were like, oh yeah, crazy amounts of snow. And then as soon as we moved out, it's been kind of mild. And to people that have been here and that have told me, they were like, yeah, this is like the lowest it's been. So it's been up and down all around.
So weird.
Yeah, we got a good amount of snow in Idaho in general. Boise here is a little bit lower elevation, so we get, a few inches, throughout the winter, but it's not massive. And we haven't been impacted like we've been watching, the communities in California just completely buried in 10 feet of snow. It's been crazy.
Yeah, it's been wild. So, I mean, the point I'm trying to make here is the changes I've seen have been all over the map from like a climate perspective, from like a fire perspective. And that's why I say the biggest changes that I've seen have typically been in myself, right? So like, it's crazy. It's a crazy job. It's a service job in many ways. And I think people can relate to this going into this as a young person. You don't really get taught that, how to see yourself because the things I've seen over the course of my career have been catastrophic in many ways, right? I've seen communities get burnt to the ground. I've seen plenty of people get burned. I've seen plenty of people die. I've seen lots of friends suffer with mental health, suicide from these situations. And I've actually had these same struggles. So it's been very, so when I say the changes that I've seen have been directly from myself and trying to understand over these last 3 years or so, like who I am as a person and how I can continue to serve my community and myself and my family and the people that I interact with from a much more healthy perspective. So yeah, so those have been some of the biggest changes. I think the biggest change that I encountered was, we can kind of look at these changes like at the micro and macro level, like we have a fire season. So we train in the off season as much as we can. And then we hit fire season and there's like a transition. And then I'm gone for 6 straight months almost. I don't see my family and the stress ramps up. And then you hit November when season ends and there's another transition back to more of like a family type of perspective, right? I'm not a big fan in like compartmentalizing my life. A lot of times we say like work-life balance or like my family life or my work life. And I'm not really a huge fan of that because I think family or life is all encompassing.
Yeah.
So it's about life balance. Like you'll hear work-life balance. I'm like, man, I kind of despise that term because it puts work at the same priority as life, and work is just an aspect of life. So
yeah.
So all these transitions can be confusing and difficult. And then even on like the macro scale, now we talk about like starting as a young fireman, I'm coming into the game like at 19 years, I just barely turned 19 years old and I'm identifying super hard. Like I have a definition of what a firefighter is, like hard physical prowess, just like
macho,
calloused. I can macho, dragging my knuckles on the ground, like, and all this type of cool stuff, like, and being able to like see tragic things and feel no emotion, right? That's the other thing. Like I know as a first responder, as an EMT, as a wildland firefighter, I'm going to see really challenging things, and I need to be able to operate in those environments so that I can assist or help people. But over the course of time, right? So you identify with all these things, and over the course of time, like you might, those things that you've suppressed for so long start to bubble up. And those things that bubble up start to challenge this new the definition that you've identified with for so long. And that sent me and sent lots of people down a very sketchy path of like being very confused as to the who you are and the why I'm here. Yeah. So those have been some of the biggest changes for sure.
I have one question. So you got started young and you've stayed in it the whole time. What is
the whole time?
What is the typical like retention of people that do step into this for the first time? How many people have been doing this for 15, 20 years?
That is a great question. I would say when we had 20,000 acre fires in a season, in a fire season, it has been, we would have people stay their entire careers. It was, I would say, very common. Now that we have more of a fire year thing going on, it is actually, our retention is pretty horrible. But that's also compared to some other like political things that are going on. I work for a federal government. I mean, I don't think you work for a federal agency thinking you're going to get rich. So we don't make very good money. Things are changing. There's a lot of really great groups out there. Grassroots wildland firefighters is doing an amazing job. They're helping out, writing, working with Congress and stuff to get us taken care of. But, for the longest time, actually the last like 5 years up until recently, the California state minimum wage was actually higher than our entry level position paycheck because we're a federal agency. Jeez. So think about that, like someone working at a fast food restaurant, not to undervalue that as a job, but the risk to life is much lower.
Yeah.
Right.
Was paying better.
Yeah.
So that's a no-brainer for a lot of people, right? So
what is it that, like for you personally even, what is it that when you hit a hard time, what is it that kept you doing this when it's so difficult? It's so intense. It takes, so much from you. What is it? What are the things that kept you in it?
Thank you for that question. That's a beautiful question that gets asked to me quite often. Yep. And from an understanding point, why the hell would you keep doing this, right? Because I don't give a shit about money.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Money is a game that we have to play. In a lot of ways, it can bring happiness. I'm not naive to the fact that having money is not a positive thing potentially, but it doesn't have to. Money doesn't determine the success an individual can have within their life.
Yep.
And to me, and there's been moments in my life that I've struggled with that deeply, where I'm like, am I doing this, paycheck to paycheck? I barely can put food on the table. I have a child with special needs. I have 2 daughters. One of them has special needs. It's like, can I afford her medication? These types of things are scary things to go through, and I live in California, man. So everything is expensive.
Yeah.
The gas price fluctuates $2 every couple days. So that's super challenging in of itself. But I also don't need the money to be happy. We live within our means. And the thing that kept me there is the job provided me a way to express myself creatively as an individual. Mm-hmm. And, I used to say purpose. It used to provide me purpose, but I've come to understand that I don't really need purpose anymore. That I live more centered in who I am. And the job just gives me this beautiful opportunity to be authentic and real and live a very fulfilled life. And that's something like that is very important to me, especially if I have children, because I want my children I'm their best example. Mm-hmm. And I want my children to see me thriving in my life and not struggling to find a job or a career that just pays money. Because if I'm just, and as you know, you guys are all shaking your head now, you agree, I could go get a job anywhere and make a ton of money. It's really not that difficult. The amount of skills that I have that the agency has provided me, one of those things could go get me paid a lot more money. But then I would be missing out on the things that I truly love. And like I expressed earlier, I was looking for a job that challenged me physically in a team environment, right? And something that I could do that was bigger than myself.
Yeah.
And that job still provides that. I actually use this specific tool that's very popular. It's not like this unknown thing, but it's called the 5 Whys. And have you guys heard of it at all?
It sounds familiar. I haven't done any kind of full digging on it, so I'd love for you to explain it.
Yeah. So I use this exercise called the 5 Whys. I do it with all the recruits that come in here. When I do public speaking, I actually talk about it too. at the academies. And I think it's a very useful tool, specifically when you're starting your career, really anything. And it has to do with a goal. So you set yourself a goal. In this case, we could say like, why do I want to be a firefighter? And I would answer that why, like, why do I want to be a firefighter? Whatever answer populates out, you ask another why to that answer. And you do that 5 times. And the goal of doing this exercise is to find the intrinsic reason why you do anything. Mm-hmm. Like whatever the goal is, like what's that intrinsic reason? And extrinsic, like motivation is incredibly valuable and important. It's not to say that intrinsic motivation is more important. I like to compare it to like the extrinsic motivation of like running down the field with a football, trying not to get tackled for the touchdown. Like you're motivated by the external world trying to take you down. You get the touchdown and it's over, it's fleeting, it's kind of the short-term positive benefit, and then you rinse and repeat. Where the intrinsic reason why you do something, the intrinsic motivation, the intrinsic value is like a very, like you're doing it for something so important that you can actually use it as a way to pivot in the right direction, for like really move the energy in your life positively. So when I was struggling in like, let's say 2016, I was having this really difficult, challenging time of like, what am I doing? Because my job, I had just recently switched Hotshot crews. I had taken first time I was ever a supervisor, I got a captain's role on the crew that I'm on now. And we were fighting fire in Reading on the Carr fire. And the Carr fire was another huge catastrophic fire. I can't remember how large it got, but it was pushing down into Reading, California. It burned tons of homes down. It killed a bunch of people. And some of the craziest fire activity I'd ever seen in my life was witnessed on this fire. And I remember this one moment we were hiking around and getting up to where we were going to go to work, and we're up on this ridge line, and there's kind of this fires like come up and slop the ridge line over. It's moving on this other side of the ridge, and it's kind of down low in between this saddle into this drainage. And we got a state crew working to the north down this ridge line trying to pick some stuff up, and then we're taking it to the south down to this road, and we're utilizing a tactic where we're using fire to fight fires, right? So we're trying to actually burn away the fuel ahead of the fire, so that when the fire gets there, there's nothing to burn. Mm-hmm. It's called in this circumstance, it was a backfire. So we're bringing fire down this thing, and I'm looking around and I hear this noise. I'm like, what is going on over there by that other crew? So I walk out to go check it out, and I just hear this like crackling and popping way down low, right? So one of the risks that we have is when we're working above fire, right? There's unburned fuel between us and the fire. This is like a huge watch out for us. Fire moves uphill. We have fire down below, and there's fuel that it can burn, and there's people above. It's not a good place to be. Yeah. Fire runs uphill. You're in the wrong position, right? And I hear this noise going on. So I run over to go check it out, and I'm looking down the hill, and you can't see where the fire's at because you're way up high and it's super steep and all the vegetation's in the way, but you can get some of the signs where there's like, you can see heat waves or the branches are moving kind of fast down below, and it's just like, it's scary. I'm like, okay. I hike down the hill a little bit, and sure as shit, I can hear this like very definitive like noise, the smell, I can feel the heat. I'm like, it's time to go. So I run up the hill and I just activate like, hey, everybody, let's get down into safety. Like, we need to get off the hill. And my crew gets up, they move really quickly. They get to their trucks. We're kind of got the rigs parked in not a great position, but it's the only place we could have them. So we initiated this so we could get the trucks out. It's like a 30-minute drive on some crap road to get everybody out. And the state crew is they're struggling to leave. And I'm just like, man, we have to go. It's like, oh, we can keep going. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I was like, no, man, it's time to go. So I finally convinced them to leave. But as the fire is cranking up this hill through this drainage, and it's like licking over the top of us, and I'm pulling people off the ground, trying to convince them to go and all this stuff. And in this moment, I'm just like, what the fuck, man? My job is no longer fighting fire and like making sure, like just doing the things I love. It's about making sure other people don't die constantly. Yeah. And that was like this huge stress of like, man, I'm not making enough fucking money. Yeah. To like to be taking on this responsibility. And it really threw me down a negative place. Over the course of like soul searching and looking at stuff, and honestly, this is where I found my authenticity from a recommendation from a friend of mine. He asked me, he's like, hey man, I feel like you're not doing too well. And I'm like, man, I'm just confused as to what I need to do. And he's like, well, before you leave, like, why don't you just try being yourself for a little bit? And he worked for a fire agency as well. And before he had left, he went to go do a different career path. But he did this before he left, and he realized he probably would have stayed a lot longer if because everybody is accepting him in those moments. And so I tried it, and I realized that people actually just wanted me to be me. And I had to, but to come to these solutions, I had to circle back and ask myself the why. First off, like, is this job still the thing I want it to be? You know what I mean? Is it still the thing that I set out to be to start? And I answered that yes. So my why was still present. That intrinsic reason why I was doing something was still present. I just had to find myself first. So by the process of being authentic and being real, I realized, like, man, that was the missing piece in that moment. Is I just had to be me. And oftentimes I talk about it like, if you can find your true authenticity, it's like moths to a light. Like, people want to be around that energy so bad because there's such a lack of it around us, right?
Yeah,
And it's so confusing. You get on social media, walk anywhere, you see commercials, you're watching TV, everything's telling you to be this other thing versus just being the thing that you truly are. And once I was able to tap into that as a person, things became much easier in my job.
What were you doing during that time to make that shift? Because I can imagine that all the way up to that point, you talked about getting into this, having this idea of what a fireman was, and holding yourself not up to a different regard, but like just in a completely different light because of what preconceived notions you had attached to that job and that being your identity. But what did you do after that to make that transition into being who you are and being okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was self-reflection. Like, I had a really great community around me. I was doing a lot of wellness coaching already. Like, just as a side note, to that point, I was already doing so much like mental performance coaching or physical performance or nutrition coaching. One of my gifts is curiosity. I'm just like, I'm super curious. Like, I don't care how silly or stupid it looks. Like, I want to try it at least once so that I know what it feels like. And then if it's not for me, it's not for me.
Yeah.
But I was doing all kinds of things. I was going to these wellness retreats. Shout out to Be the Wellness. And I had some really great mentors. I was doing some coaching with them. I went through a year-long authenticity program, which was super interesting and kind of like, to speak to what you're asking, Phil, like, it had to, what I needed to do was actually look at my past and like identify like the self-talk and the stories that I've been carrying along with me my entire life. And it's bad. It can be kind of cliche or silly in a way. Like, you go to any therapist, probably, I don't want to say any therapist, and they're going to try and get you to like, oh, what was your mom like? How was your dad? Like, also, they're going to ask you these like historical questions, but they're so true because these issues, the way you are gets passed down to you generationally. And, when you were the most vulnerable too, like the first 14 years of your life, you have your neuroplasticity is the most plastic, your learning center in your brain, right? And so they often say, like, you become the person you are within the first 7 years of your life. I would extend that to 14 or even a little bit past that, because you're going through puberty and any little thing can get you to, gives you this way of being and acting into adulthood without the connection to how you got it in the first place. Through the things that I'm doing now in my personal life, I have still not met one person that doesn't carry some sort of feeling of not being good enough. I have not met that person, including myself. And really, if you even break down the feeling of not being good enough, or this feeling of not being valued, or whatever it is, it's really the fear of not being loved, straight up. That's the way I see it, is that we all intrinsically are searching to be loved more. I think that's like the most granular place that we can take it to. So once I was able to discover some of these stories that I was gifted in telling myself, and I was able to see them for what they were, I was able to let go of them and understand that they weren't true.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had, and we kind of like lightly touched on it, but you hit a really dark point in your life. And if you don't mind sharing just the moment that you were having like suicidal thoughts and what came out of that and how you changed and improved because of that situation.
Yeah, thank you. 2016 was like the start of me kind of like discovering who I was. I was very much so just moving randomly without any thought in the world before that, just going by just day by day, not really with no intention, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And 2016, I think, was probably the moment that I really started, the year that I really started to uncover a bunch of stuff around me. So I was a captain in 2016, and my goal in life, in my career, in life actually at that point, I became a hotshot in 2006. When I committed to working for the Forest Service, I was like, okay, what is the raddest shit that I could possibly do? Where could I take? What's the highest thing that I could possibly do? And I was like, okay, I could go be a smoke jumper, or I could go be on a hotshot crew. I got on a hotshot crew in 2006, and I remember vividly we were up in Alaska, fighting fire in Alaska, and I'm standing on this riverbank after a long shift working and stuff, swatting mosquitoes off me, but just really taking in this riverbank, just like how beautiful and vast and remote Alaska is. So beautiful. And I just remember hearing my superintendent at the time, like, laughing and joking, having a good time. And I look back, and he's just having the time of his life around this campfire as we're making food over this fire, just like real primitive shit. And it's just us out there, like hundreds of miles. There's nothing but wild animals and us. I was like, wow, this is the coolest job. I want to be a superintendent. That is the highest thing I could do. And so I set the goal, and I set out to be that. And in 2020, the superintendent that was on the crew had left, and I had gotten the job as a superintendent. And it was, career-wise, I was like, this is fucking awesome. I got it in April. Just as a reminder, like, if we don't remember, like 2020 is like COVID is cracking, man. So like, I'm taking this new job as a superintendent, and I'm navigating how to fight fire in a healthy way and like take care of my people, and COVID's going on. I'm like, man, this is stressful as hell. And then also 2020 was the year it was the most catastrophic wildland fire season I've ever been a part of, for sure. In California, at the Billion Acre Fire, we had the North Complex, it's like 500,000 acres. We had just numerous fires, just smoking homes and going super big. And we had, we base our fire seasons on like an overtime perspective. And so we worked 16 hours a day, and then we're off 8 hours. And from June until the middle of November, we had 1,300 hours of overtime. So I worked over an entire year within 6 months. So we're tired. And so I'm expressing these in a way because I never once thought in that 6 month period, I never felt sorry for myself. I never felt like, oh, this is the worst thing that I've ever done. Like, I can't do this. I was so stoked that I had my dream job, and that I had this like mission in my mind of like what we were going to do. I was driven. And those 6 months were awesome. It was super fun. I learned a shit ton. I had a really great supporting cast around me, and we had a really good, safe season. But then that transition I was talking about, fire season ends and it gets slower. And I'm like ready to take a break. Like, I'm physically and mentally just extremely tired. And you enter this new world of like admin responsibilities and trying to do fields work and all this kinds of crazy shit. And my boss was like, you know, and it's not his fault or anything, but he's like, we have all these priorities, and it's like their priorities all of a sudden become your priorities, and all you want is a break. Mm-hmm. And I realized in like the end of November, I was just like, fuck, man, like my life is just going to be this now. Like, I'm just going to live on this fucking hamster wheel of like training for the next season, getting my ass kicked, like trying to rest, but not getting a rest, and then training again, just like rinse and repeat for the next fucking 15 years or whatever. And, I was just like sitting there like, man, I don't know if I could do this. Like, I can't leave. I already tried leaving my job once. I don't know if I can do that. Like, I don't have any skills. I don't have like, what do I have to offer? All these things. Cause I've done this for so long and like undervaluing myself a little bit. And I just got to a point where maybe I'll just step off the hamster wheel. Maybe I'll just stop this shit. I'll just end my life. And it got to the point where I was sitting on my bed in my bedroom. It was a beautiful day, just like today is here right now. And the sun was pounding through the windows on me, and it felt good. I was getting ready to go on a run, because that's the way I've always coped with my stress, is just beat the shit out of myself physically. And I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and my wife had gone to do something with the kid there. I can't remember. She took him to school. I can't remember. And I just the most visceral feeling in my life approached me, where I was like, I am arm's distance away from being in my safe and grabbing a gun and just shooting myself. I can feel it still. Mm-hmm. It's not a part of me anymore, which is really great. Like it is, I mean, it's always going to be a part of me. It's not, but I don't feel that anymore. And when I talk about it, it's still something that I'm so grateful for to tap into. Mm-hmm. Because it's not like it's not something that I'm afraid I'm never going to do again. Right. It's something that happened. And I think it's important for me to know what that still feels like. But in that moment, I got scared, man, like really scared. I was like, fuck, I gotta stop. I can't do this. And thank God I was able to muster some kind of courage in that moment. And that's oftentimes the difference maker for a lot of people is the courage. After courage is joy and happiness and all that stuff, but you have to reach that point, because everything under courage is very scary. And I was able to find some courage and slap myself out of it. And it was I got super scary to the point I was like shaking. I was like, oh my God. And I called my wife and I asked her to come home. She came home, and I just told her straight away. I was like, dude, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with something. I don't know what it is. Like, where am I going? I got all the questions. And so yeah, that was the very real feeling of that situation. And I asked her, I was like, I need space, I need time, I need to do something to let go of this feeling and understand it and come to a place of understanding. And she was like, so awesome. She's like, I'll do whatever it takes, whatever you need. So I did. I spent some time, if I'm being very honest, what I did was I went and found a place to legally do psilocybin, a psilocybin ceremony, and that let me release and expose and understand what was happening with me. And what it was, I set a goal, I achieved it, and I didn't know what to do next. Yep. Like, where am I going now? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that in that moment, and I can talk about how I feel about goals now, but in that moment, I had reached what I'd reached, and I thought I didn't know where to go. I was just like, fuck, that was it. I guess I'm done. And obviously that's not true, but the real thing was I was asking myself all these fucking questions and trying to find all these answers and all these silly things, and I just to realize that the questions that we're constantly asking and the answers we're constantly looking for, they kind of don't exist. They're all a distraction from you just being you.
Yep.
Right. And so I realized that a lot of these questions, things I was asking, were this desire for something to fill a void in me. And the way I talk about desire is a distraction from seeing the beauty in a moment. Desire is a distraction from seeing the beauty in a moment. And maybe not everybody feels that way, but that's how I felt. And so I had to very clearly define what I needed versus what I wanted, because I was on the mission for a want to fill a void in my life. And I was able to find needs and really make a very clean list of the things I needed, which is movement, nutrition, and sleep. I have to take care of this chemistry experiment we call a body. And if I'm not taking care of this first, the physical body, then it's really hard for me to approach the other things I do, which is sharing perspective like we're doing now, in a way to understand each other and ourselves more. It's not opinion based. I think opinions are okay, but they lack information. So, and we often use opinions as truth, and it's not. Perspective is lived. It's something that you have done. It's as close to truth as you can get, but it's also not the truth, because you and I, we could be looking at this Apple case or whatever, and I could tell you what the front looks like, and you could tell me what the back looks like. We're still looking at the same or talking about the same concept, but through the art of sharing perspective, this thing gets to turn, and we get to understand what it is more. Mm-hmm. And that's the art of understanding, the art of sharing perspective for me. It also honors my perspective and honors your perspective. I'm not trying to tell you that my perspective is the one that's most important. So that's the next one. The next one is don't identify. And I kind of talked about this and many philosophers all over the world talk about identity and things like this as far as change goes. And what I'm saying here is everything fucking changes. Everything. Yeah. Even our cells. Every 7 years, our cells regenerate and change. It's our bodies, the way our mind is, how we age, everything changes. No man steps in the same river twice, right? Because the river is not the same and the man isn't the same, right? That's a famous Stoic saying. So why would I identify with an emotion? Why would I say I am angry? Why would I say I am happy even? Why would I say I am a firefighter? Everything changes. Our concepts are so awesome, don't get me wrong, but they're limiting in the way that we understand the truth of the matter. And so, and I can I'll get to that later if you want to ask me about values or whatever, but so don't identify. And it's not to say that I don't enjoy being happy or I enjoy being, or even that I try not be angry. It's just to understand that these emotions, these things are fluid and they move back and forth, right? And it's just me trying to let that process happen and not claiming to be this one specific thing. And then acceptance is my next one, where it's just an understanding of fate. I hated the word fate forever. Don't tell me that everything happens for a reason. I create my own destiny, God damn it. So, and both are true. Both are very true. And to me, acceptance is just the understanding that the world, the environment that we live in are so complex that it's impossible for us to control the external things that are happening, right? I'm driving down the road, unbeknownst to me, someone slams into the back of me and I got an fender bender. That was cause and effect on many, many cosmic levels that happened to take place me driving down the highway. Oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. But I'm also a creation of my thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. And how I think and how I act within those thoughts is how I'm going to project myself into the world. And that is, I create my own destiny. Yeah. So when I get out of my car, am I going to approach this individual with love, or am I going to tell this person they're a piece of shit and they don't know what the hell they're doing? Because now I'm projecting something different. Mm-hmm. So I get to choose how I'm going to create myself moving forward. The next one is for anybody that's a busybody like myself. Like I have a really hard time sitting still. Is like I have to actively focus on creating stillness. I have to sit still, and I have to give myself the ability to say I do not have to do everything. Like it's okay to say no sometimes. It's okay to sit on the couch and binge watch The Mandalorian. I don't care.
Yep.
Like create some.
You need Mando. Needs to happen.
You need the Mando. So create this stillness. I have to totally tell myself create the stillness. In fact, I was plagued by this. You know, I go on a 2-week assignment or whatever. I come home. My family's operating, they're doing stuff. My wife's got a program, and I'm on the couch feeling guilty because I'm so fucking tired that I want to participate, but I can't. And you feel this guilt, and then you enter her world and you're telling her like, you got to do what I want to do versus like what they're already doing and just integrating into what they got. Anyways, create some stillness, man. Like that's for me, it was create stillness so that I can move to my next one, which is being the observer. And being the observer is like an individual sitting at the park bench. This is you observing everything that's happening in the external world. People throwing their football, old people holding hands, walking in front of you, like whatever it is. Like these are all your feelings, your emotions, the things that are constantly changing. You're centered in who you are, observing, unattached. And so to me, that's one of the best gifts that I've learned how to do recently is how to observe. And then the last one is just learning how to let go. You know, we're all gonna like kind of go fall back into like a position where this stuff is really hard to remember. But if we can ultimately understand that our time on this earth or this planet is very short, the ultimate let go is coming. Like, how do you want to spend your time while you're here? Mm-hmm. Let go of the bullshit. Let go of the frustrations or whatever it is so that you can fully enjoy and express yourself in a creative way that's good for everyone, including yourself. And that's not to say like I don't have wants. Like I totally have wants. But I want things because they help me express life in a cool way. Not because I need it for love. Not because I need it to be happy. Like it's just because I want to go do something badass. I want to have cool shit. Like that's whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what got me through the suicidal stuff is just really, you know, the mechanism of doing a psychedelic journey, I think was very beneficial for me because it opened the door to a possibility. It didn't cure me. Like I'm still working on myself like constantly. It didn't cure me or anything. It's not a magic pill, but it gave me a key that I had to consciously use to open a door to my personal possibilities. And that gave me freedom to understand myself and really come up with a more healthy way to interact with myself and the external world and all types of stuff. And I still, and it really motivated me also to continue on this path to help guide people to this same awareness in many ways, which is what I'm doing now kind of more in my personal life, is trying to assist first responders and trying to discover these types of things for themselves.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing in that situation too, is it all comes back to intention. You went into that situation looking to discover something about yourself. You weren't just like partying or, you know, haphazardly like going into this thing trying to have fun. You're doing work the entire time. You're trying to improve. You're trying to get more perspective and understand something. Like you said, that case, you're trying to see around the bend a little bit more of Ben. And I think that's incredibly healthy and powerful. So thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah, for sure. My pleasure. Yeah, it's an interesting and fun thing to, a lot of the things that we think and that we struggle with, like the answer to them are so very simple.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? One of my mantras to myself is, I am what I am not. I am what I am not. And that's just the understanding that everything changes, right? Like when I'm not all this other shit that I think I'm associating myself with, I get to be much closer to who I am. The definition of who we are isn't like, I don't know what the fuck I am, really, honestly. Like, our concepts are great, but they're limiting in a way because they don't actually, they're great for communication. Like, Matt, Phil, I'm standing over here by the tree on the south side of this building. Like, those concepts get you to where I'm going, right? Like, that's great. But have you ever actually like stood and like looked at a tree?
Yes, I have. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. This runs like right in. I had this exact moment. And I have to just, I'm sorry, but like you say that.
Get it. Yeah.
When I got into meditation, I was on a long walk and I literally did that exact thing where I'm like in awe. This thing is so massive in comparison of me, and it's alive. How long has it been here? And like my mind just started actually understanding that my understanding before was so small. And just being there and like, what is going on? And all these other massive questions started expanding from that awareness.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Cause like, and that's how I feel about it because, and this is why I bring up like concepts, you know, because the concept tree or even oak tree, like we try and get more specific, like they still, like I said, they're important. We shouldn't undervalue them because they're great for communication. But when you, just like you expressed, when you look at a tree and like the way the bark is layered and like there's ants crawling inside of it, the roots are sucking water into its whatever, there's different layers, you know, there's the branches that reach out with the leaves that have different colors, and somehow this thing's bringing in like carbon dioxide and giving us oxygen, like, and they're constantly reaching for the sun. It's like, what?
Yeah,
on a planet in a galaxy and
the amount, the amount of purpose, the amount of design, and all of that. When that really, when you really are open to receiving the incredible nature of everything around you, it's humbling.
Yes, man, and this is like this is the point. Like, it's, if we can understand the value of our concepts, right, then we can understand the value of our concepts, but we can also understand that they're limiting. Now we can look at things differently. We can see people differently. We can see ourselves differently. We can understand like this. There's so much that we don't understand, but how fucking cool is that? Like, it's so extra beautiful. And we can also start to understand like how we construct what I call our realities, right? In many ways, we talk about realities as being truth. Well, the reality is this person didn't know this. Realities, in my opinion, are just based on someone's perspective. Like, that's all it is, which in a way, if we understand perspective again, also is limiting because it comes from us. So to truly understand something, we have to gain more perspective and gain more understanding, right? So our concepts are great because they can create our realities. Concepts can change, like your definition of a specific concept might be slightly different than mine, right? And we constantly are making these different concepts, and because we make them and these realities that we have are built on concepts, it means that we can endlessly make endless realities, which is also pretty mind-blowing, right? Yeah. The problem is, though, specifically with like, you know, from my perspective, how I live my life is I was living in a very compartmentalized life where I was a firefighter, and then I would try and shut that off, and I would come home and be a husband, and then I'd shut that off and I'd go ride my mountain bike. Now I'm a mountain biker. I'd shut that off and go visit my mom and dad. Now I was a son. And you're trying to do all these different things, but for me, like I don't think enough of us try and understand values, right? Like what your core values are. And in the agency, when I was a firefighter, when I was a young fireman, I was taught a set of values: duty, respect, integrity, right? Duty, respect, integrity. That was like my first exposure to someone talking about values at all, like, and really try to get me to understand them. And so I tried to carry these fucking realities, these values into all of my realities, right? So I'm like, oh, I'm trying to be a firefighter. Okay, now I'm not a firefighter, but I only know these 3 value sets. I'm trying to duty, respect, integrity doesn't work very well when you're playing Legos on the floor with your kids, you know, or you're riding your mountain bike, or yeah, exactly. Respect the Legos. But it's been very, so it was like, I was like, man, this doesn't work, and it's confusing and all these types of things. Or what you're trying to do is, you know, you have this value set for work, and then you come home and it's like, okay, my family's the most important thing, right? But what about yourself and like all these other things? Okay, now I'm on my mountain bike. Fun is the most important thing. And so you're constantly trying to change these different value sets and moving around, compartmentalize. It gets very frustrating, very confusing, and very hard. What I've done is just understand that our concepts are limiting, but we can make endless realities. It's awesome. It's not efficient or easy or even like proper to live compartmentalized realities. What if I lived amongst all of my realities at the same time? Because is it not true that when I'm a firefighter, I'm still a son, and I'm still a father, and I'm still a husband, and even though I don't have my mountain bike, I'm still a fucking mountain biker, and vice versa. When I'm home, am I still not a firefighter? Like, I'm all of these things, all of the time, right? And so, and this also comes into the identity. It's like, I'm not just solely a firefighter. Like, I'm not just solely a husband. I'm like all these things. So it gave me this ability to have this much broader perspective, this much broader view of my life, where I saw all of the things that I did, all of the things I'm creating, all the things I have been, all the things I want to be, whatever it is, and look at them all and be like, okay, so how do I do this successfully? Well, why don't I just create a set of values that work for all of them together? So that when I'm a firefighter, I'm doing that. The values don't change ever. They work for every single reality ever. And so I set myself up a core set of values. And the first one is to value life amongst all else. And this was a big one that came out of that suicide stuff, is like, life is not yours. It's not mine. Life is ours. We share it. Everything in life is a part of life. It's a giant container, kind of, even though life exceeds past that, you know, like but it's this thing we share, right? The next one is be love. Like I mentioned before, like it's the one thing we are all would just love more of. Everybody wants to be loved, man. Like absolutely everybody just wants to feel that love. So if I am that, if I embody what this is and bring it into everything I do, right? I communicate with love. I act with love. I see people with love. Dude, life is so good. It's so good, man. And it changes the whole paradigm with people. Yeah. If you're approaching with love and shit, most oftentimes it disarms any situation, right? So there's that. And then the next one, my fourth value, is to have a willingness to learn. Constantly go back and look at my old programming, constantly be sharing unique perspectives with people, so that I never am stuck with one thing, that this is the thing. Like, let it evolve, let it change. Like it makes life so fun. And it's so cool to be wrong sometimes. You're like, wow, I had it wrong. Like, wow, I can be so much more efficient now. Like, this is so great. So have a willingness to learn. And then the fourth one is to live a life of servitude. And this isn't, I want to help people. This is me creating an environment for people, when they come into it, have the ability to discover who they truly are. That is what I'm trying to do. I don't want to force it on people. I'm not doing anything. I'm just trying to be this thing, so that when people in it, they can let go of the things that they want. They can find their authentic nature, and they can learn how to express themselves. That's my values. That's how I live my life.
I love it, dude.
Yeah, those are deep. I've just been listening for a while. It's been a fun journey. Man, you're really the whole story. I think one thing is, I think there's a lot of people who have a similar story, but a lot of people don't talk about it. And I think, like you're talking about a lot with perspective, and this is one of the reasons we love interviewing and talking with people and sharing stories and digging into stories.
Absolutely.
And going deeper than just like our industry and the technology that we focus on or what we do for work. Like, we like digging into these stories because it gives you perspective, and it also makes a certain level of like comfort in conversation with people who haven't gotten to the point of facing themselves and digging into who they are. And your story really just unpacks that in a way that's pretty powerful, and definitely appreciate you being willing to share.
It's my pleasure, man. That's what I'm here to do.
If we can kind of talk on the Goggins challenge and what got you into this and what it's all about for you.
The Goggins challenge, man. That dude is savage. Well, shoot. I was a fairly big ultra marathon runner, kind of like the mid 2000s or so. And that was all fun and whatever. And then I stopped and I was just like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then, David, have you guys read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me?
Yes.
I mean, dude, it speaks for itself. If people haven't read it, they should. But it's a very inspirational book. There's a lot of, like you just said, like there's a lot of people that are in these positions but don't talk about them. And so like people who are willing to express those things, those dark things about themselves, like it's great. I mean, that's that authenticity piece, right? People start to, I often say, like, a lot of times after I have conversations like this, someone will say, oh, thank you for being vulnerable. And to me, I don't see it as being vulnerable anymore. I'm not being vulnerable. I am confident in who I am and in a state of being, and I express myself in a way that allows me to share authenticity. Vulnerability, from my perspective, is just the first step to finding your authenticity. It's uncomfortable. It's like it's an unpracticed muscle. So anyways, the Goggins stuff, so he's inspirational. In many ways, there's things that happened to him that I could relate to. Obviously, he was an ultra runner, so I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And the first year he did it, I just was like, oh, that's pretty cool that he's doing that thing. And I didn't even think anything of it. We didn't even do it. And then the second year, my brother Josh reaches out to me, who's also a firefighter and worked on Hotshot crews with me in the past. And he just says, hey, you want to do the David Goggins thing, like whatever, early March, this date with me? And I was just like, I just said yes, And so it was just a commitment to it. The first time we did it, we raised money for some Burn Institute stuff, the Wildland Firefighter Wellness Foundation, or I'm sorry, not the Wildland Firefighter Foundation that provides firefighters money when they get lost or where they die or burn injuries or whatever they need. Two great foundations. So we did that, and it was cool and painful too, man. It reminded me of like just how sucky running 48 miles, 4 hours, or was it 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours? Just like how horrible that was.
Did Josh run ultra marathons before? Like, why did he all of a sudden?
You know what? I can't remember if he did or not. Like, he's definitely ran some marathons with me. He was running a lot for sure back in the day with me, but he not at that moment. Anyway, so we inspired each other to do this thing, and now it's a thing. So now we're doing this thing every year.
That's awesome.
And then, yeah, it's cool. We've been raising money for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation the last couple times, which is my youngest daughter. That's what she suffers from, is cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disorder that affects they have limited access to or no access to a certain protein. Well, I hopefully don't fuck this up, but then it can give them build up in the lungs or GI issues. So she has to take artificial enzymes to break down food and do all these like lung treatment things. But it's really exciting because when she was born, the average living age or life expectancy was like 30 years old, man. And I was like, that was pretty heavy. And she's 12, or she'll be 13 at the end of this year, but from the moment she was born to now, there's been incredible progress. So like, it's like one of the few things we can legitimately say, like, we are getting very close to like curing medication that can cure this thing. And so she takes a medication right now that actually like almost completely erases any symptoms.
Wow.
Which is just super, super great stuff. So, and motivating to like raise money for, because it's actually like, there's like the light at the end of the tunnel is pretty close. It seems like. So yeah, the Dave Goggins thing, we got to meet him. He is every bit as savage as he makes himself out to be.
He's pretty authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say so. I don't think you can get any more authentic than David Goggins.
You don't get a on-camera version and an off-camera version. You get David Goggins.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool, man. Like, so yeah, it's cool to participate in something like that. And what a really great event, honestly. When I was ultra running, you paid to go race.
Yeah.
Like, he's inspired thousands, maybe millions of people to, instead of pay for a race, raise money for whatever cause they're searching for, which is just incredible. So yeah, we've done it 3 times. I always tell myself, maybe this is the last year, but I'm probably destined to do this for the rest of my life.
So you're still actively on duty. Yeah.
We I'm off today, obviously, but we have a seasonal staff, which is getting staffed up to permanent staff. The Hotshot crew consists of 20 to 25 people. And so typically we have a seasonal staff, but there's been push from Washington to have a permanent year-round Hotshot crews, which is for firefighters in the Forest Service, which is great. But I'm a permanent employee, so I work year-round.
Yeah. And just to understand too, like organizationally, like are there Hotshot crews in every state?
Yes, not every state, no, but mostly on the west side. There's some East Coast crews for sure. There's give or take 100 crews in the nation. Hotshot crews are a national resource. So we go all over the United States. Like I mentioned before, we went to Alaska. So we're not just, even though I'm in California, we oftentimes go out of the state to go fight fire. So, and our seasons they're all over the map sometimes because we're a national resource. We can go all over the place, but typically they're mid-May-ish, April sometimes, like New Mexico, Arizona might have some fires right now, all the way to December, roughly.
That's awesome. Yeah, man, I'm just thinking back through everything you've talked about. There were so many points I was like resonating with, agreeing with, but I didn't want to like dig into them. Just wanted to let you tell the whole story. But I think this is a very, very powerful episode and conversation that I think people should listen to a couple times. There are a lot of people that just struggle with finding themselves, finding their purpose, finding their who they are and why they're doing what they're doing. We talk about this even just, without even going that deep, just talking about like business stuff. Like so many people are just like on that wheel. They're on that wheel of like, you're growing up, you don't know what you want to do. You get stuck in a job and you get told you're supposed to go to school, and then you're supposed to get this 9-to-5 job. And then like you just are on this cycle. And it's like, we get in these conversations of like, man, why? I feel like 80% of people get stuck in that. They don't find something. And I feel like often it's when something drastic happens. Like you talked about, of you get to a certain level of what you were trying to accomplish, and then you realize that's not the end. Like that's not who you are. And I think that's why we even see such a big amount of suicide and of people that get to a high level and then that does happen, like in sports and in entertainment, where that was their identity. You're like, I'm living to be an athlete. Now I have all this money. I've bought everything I can buy. I've gone everywhere I can go. And they didn't have a higher goal or purpose. It was just the sport or the acting or the comedy. And yet it comes all the way down, we see that publicly, but there's so many people that don't get seen story-wise that, it's the same route. And so I think it's important to, like you said, slow down and figure out who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it. Just definitely powerful.
So one of the things that holds us up a lot of times is specifically, so I recently just had some thoughts around this because I'm also trying to start a podcast. I'm also trying to, I have an LLC that works with people trying to find self-leadership, right? In more of like a corporate type of way. And I also want to start a foundation sometime. And I have all these things, right? And in the background, I'm a wildland firefighter that takes up a ton of my fucking time, dude. And that's good. I don't have any issues with it. But when you're trying to be creative as a person in other ways, you're like, where's the time? Is it going to be good? Am I doing this for the right reasons? Fuck, dude, is this going to work out? All these questions and things come up. And you're like, oh man, and then you quit. Right? You're like, oh, I'm not going to follow through, Something that I recently discovered is it's this thing of fear. Fear, in my opinion, has two sides. The good side of fear can motivate us to become something we never fucking thought we could be, right? From a very small perspective or understanding, it's like the track athlete trying to beat the world record or their time or whatever, right? The fear of not getting getting a low time motivates them to run harder and train harder to get a world record or whatever, right? And that's super awesome. Fear in and of itself, the fear of not having shelter has led to skyscrapers. How insanely crazy is that? The fear of not being fed led to agriculture. The fear of not being clothed during the weather led to crazy fashion. It's all these incredibly creative things have come out of fear. So I don't think fear in and of itself is all that crazy, but the duality of fear, right? The other side of fear is doubt. And doubt is what stops an individual from creating something awesome in their lives.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand that doubt is what leads us to this, am I going to be loved? Am I going to love this? Do I love myself through this process? And that doubt is what completely stops our abilities to create endless possibilities. And our gift as humans is the emotions. It's the fear. It's the way we can express our love. It's the way we do things. That's our gift from life. We get to create endless possibilities so that creation can keep creating. It's such a beautiful thing. And when we can really understand that these are gifts instead of putting a negative context on it, and understand that fear is actually something very useful and awesome.
Yeah.
And we can actually use it for our creative nature. We get to express ourselves in some pretty fucking amazing ways.
Yeah. And right alongside the fear is then that conversation around failure.
Yes,
we're afraid, so we don't do it. And then even if we get past the fear of I do want to start it, what if it doesn't work? Or what if something goes wrong? And so many people end at even if they try it once and they hit that first level of something didn't go right, then it shoots them right back to okay, maybe I'm not good enough to do that, or maybe I wasn't meant to do that, or maybe it's not gonna work. And you have to change your mindset around what failure is, even when you get past the fear part. And man, we talk about that a lot.
It's feedback.
It's absolute. Yeah. It's feedback. Anybody who has accomplished something tremendous, extraordinary, whether through invention or becoming the best in their industry or their sport or their whatever it is, they overcame the fear. They learned that failure is just an opportunity to learn, and then they applied consistency of doing the thing. So many people end up thinking, look, if I want to start a podcast, I want to become a basketball player. It's you don't get to decide that. And even if you work your butt off, it's not going to happen in a year. Patience when you're pursuing something excellent, after getting through all those things, that piece is there. Things take time. and it has to be a part of who you are and your journey.
Yes.
Like long term.
Yes. And that's so true, man. I agree with everything you said. It's great to know that, like, in the pursuit of the expression of the things you want to do, there's going to be difficult moments, and those moments present an opportunity to learn, and that learning, that willingness to learn, gives you more growth in whatever the pursuit of thing that you're going for. So I think that's absolutely spot on, and I think it's just so it's interesting because a lot of times we get stuck in, like, let's say, for instance, I want to start a podcast. Like, is it going to suck? I need to make more money. I'm going to pay, like, whatever it is. I need all this money to make it work. And we get very confused as to, like, what the success of something looks like. Yeah. And a lot of times the success is there's a lot of times directly linked to some monetary value, right? Or listeners or whatever the fuck it is. And that oftentimes can stop us from living a life of full expression of who we are, right? Because now we're trying to express what other people want. You know what I mean? So, and that's just in a lot of ways a trap.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Man, if you were truly being, right, living in a state of being, like a dog, like a tree, like these things all know exactly what they're going to do. They're not perplexed as to what they're going to be, right?
Not losing sleep over it.
Very unique. Humans are very unique in the way where we constantly are asking ourselves questions, right? Living in a state of being is just understanding, really, that there's endless fucking love around us and that we have access to it whenever the fuck we want. So it gets rid of the fucking doubt. It gets rid of the fear of failure and lets us tap into this very creative nature for the sole reason because it's an expression of who we are, and it's fun, like a child. Like a child being curious about stuff. Follow your fucking curiosity, because that oftentimes leads to some very creative things. And when it's not fun anymore, stop.
Yeah.
Go do something else. It's all good.
Yeah.
It's not a failure. Take the learning lessons from it and continue to be curious and keep following that passion. And if people want to pay you for being you, so be it.
Yeah. That's
like, who cares?
That's
good for them.
That's where I think more of that encouragement of, like, not just trying to go pursue a career for the money, but actually doing something you love, that can lead to a better career than you could have imagined going to school for and become, whatever PhD level. I don't care. Like, when you love something and you're getting to do that thing, that is way more powerful, and there's way more opportunity in it. And that's the byproduct. You're not even doing it because of the money or because of the interest, or so many people we can keep saying podcast just because it came up as a thing we were talking about as an idea. So many people now are like, oh, I want to do a podcast because I see that it's an opportunity. Like, I don't even know what I'm going to talk about yet, but I want to get all these views, and, they start it for the wrong reason. And even people starting businesses, people start businesses for the wrong reason. I think there's a market for this. I just want to do this thing. That's the fastest way to close a business, is you start something that it's not really what you love doing, and you're starting it because of the money or because of the attention. That's not sustainable. You start a podcast, guess how many listens you're going to have, season 1, 7, and 3 of those are your mom, your grandma.
Right.
When you're able to find a path that is actually something you're passionate about, that transforms it. And ignoring the outside voice of, like, how many views, how many likes did I get? Like, you can't judge stuff based on that. You have to that's where the consistency comes in. You ignore, I don't even care how many views we have. I don't even know how many people listen to our podcast. I don't care. Like, we have a mission of what we're doing and why we're doing it and who we want to talk to and what stories we want to share. We're just going to do it regardless, and we'll figure out, like, sure, do we have to somehow get paid? Like, if we're going to keep growing an organization, do we have to somehow fund this so that we can pay and eat and our kids can, have clothes? Yes. But is that, like, goal number 1? No. That's not the starting point.
No. And for me personally, on my journey into this, and it's like, it's amazing getting to this point and having this conversation and realizing, I'm like, for me, this started with a genuine conversation with my brothers. And we were so deep in to conversation and what we were talking about that it was like we time warped. And I was like, more of that in my life, please, God, you know. And it was like, and then it was just tapping into that and realizing kind of what you've shared with getting more perspective, talking with more people, and getting to this point in the conversation where you realize, like, my understanding has improved today just in the time that we've chatted. You've helped me define a better way of looking at fear. And as you were talking and explaining, I'm like, that is what was going on. I have like specific examples in my life that you helped shape and mold into a more defined concept. And then I realized, I'm like, thank God I chose the right way at that point, because I was feeling doubt and I was feeling shaky, but I chose to be courageous in that moment. And then I was aware enough to realize, oh, from that moment on, things did, like, I got instant feedback. Things started moving in a better direction. But all the way up to that point in my life, I was making the wrong decision over and over again. I would be courageous, or I'd be motivated by the fear, get into a situation, and then doubt would creep in, and then I would stop. And it was like that one time that made the difference where I felt the doubt and I was like, I can't fucking make that stupid decision again. I don't care if I fail and fall flat on my face in this moment. I don't care. I'm staying in this seat and I'm doing this thing. And then all these things started coming from it. But again, thank you for helping me understand that moment better in my life, because that's a tool. That's something I can use moving forward. And that's what this is all about, is like getting to these points where we're like, God, the energy, the amount of like understanding the energy, the amount of just progression within a conversation in ourselves. I can't get enough of that, man. So thank you.
Yeah, dude. That's what's up.
Yeah.
That's what's up, man. What was I going to say? I was going to say something like the opportunity is, you know, we kind of talked about like what is opportunity just briefly, but like opportunity is the opportunity to learn. Like that's what it is. That's all. That's how I define it as. You know, like you were saying, like if we can understand fear, like we talked about it, now we can sort of like think about like how we interact with, because we talk a lot about ourselves too, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the great things about me is like I see myself, my old self, in other people constantly.
Oh yeah,
constantly.
Yeah.
You know, that's the observation. As we grow as people, you see it. Like, you know what a really good example of it is our kids. Like our kids are like almost perfect expressions of who we are. Like, you know what I mean? At those ages. And so like you can think about it, and maybe this is, well, we're just going to go there, but you can think about like, am I creating that doubt in my children? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What am I doing to create doubt in their lives versus providing them the opportunity to fail? Because that's what failure is. Yeah. Failure is an opportunity, period. Like we look at failure as like this negative thing. It's like, no, man. Failure is the opportunity to learn from something.
Yeah. If you're not failing, you're not doing enough.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think everything you're saying is great. And I'm in the same boat, Phil. Like to me, this is what it's about. This is it, man. This is what our ancestors did forever. They would gather around a fire and tell their fucking stories, like, and share their perspectives. Like, and that's how you get these legendary, crazy stories about dragons and witches, and wizards. You know what I mean? Like, it all started from Uncle Harry catching a fish.
But okay, and so this is tapping into something that I'm very interested with you specifically, because my mind is flashing back to, you know, I've listened to a ton of podcasts and great interviews, and there was a certain depth in the conversation between Joe Rogan and professional surfer Shane Dorian. And there was something that was in that where I'm like, Shane is different because his environment has been this moving, it's Mother Nature and it's moving around him. And it's this fluid thing, but I'm finding the same kind of quality in you. And I'm wondering, like, what is the through line there? Because you're out in nature all the time. And I think you're connecting with something that, like, a lot of us who are just staying in our houses over and over again, and then going to an office over and over and over again. But it's refreshing to be around, and also something that, like, when I connect with it more often, I feel like I'm more balanced out. What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important for people to be in nature as much as possible, personally. Like, I do believe that at least westernized American culture has lost a lot of the connection to just nature in general. And I don't want to make it sound all super hippy dippy and all this shit, but, like, at the end of the day, like, I mean, just being in the sun, being, like, feeling the earth on your feet, just look, like, I don't know anybody that just straight up hates nature. Yeah. Like, people go traveling to be next to a beach. That's nature, you know, to look at the ocean. Like, that's like, so, you know, I do also, I'm very interested and very passionate about how, like, indigenous people and our ancestors lived, you know, like, Mother Earth provides fucking literally everything we need. Like, she already does this for us. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that creating as humans is a bad thing. Like, I don't think that in fact, we are a part of the natural world. So it's interesting. It's an interesting concept to say that we have unnatural things. Like,
chemically produced foods.
Yeah, sure. But all these chemicals are coming from natural things. And these, you know, do you see my line? Like, I'm not saying, like, these things aren't inherently probably damaging in some way or whatever. Yeah. But that we use it as this kind of context. Like, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I just think that I've spent enough time with indigenous people as well before, and there's just their connection to nature is so beautiful in a way that they understand the amount of abundance there is. And it's very easy to get distracted in the way we've constructed our environments and our current culture to be thinking that we don't have the things we need. And oftentimes, if you just step outside, you realize that it's all there. Yeah.
I think that's another big piece. Yeah. Is just the amount of noise we get from outside in today's culture. Like, society, media just pushing you to always tell you you're not good enough. Like, you need this car, you need this makeup, you need this makeover, you need the surgery. Like, I was going to maybe even post something about it. I was on my drive to work this morning, and there was an ad on about, like, you don't need to eat good or work out. You can come into this spa clinic and we'll give you this treatment that'll lose some of your fat. I'm just like, that's such terrible messaging. Like, we get so much outside noise that we hear over and over and over and over in commercials and audio and video, and that is, I think, how so many of us get trapped mentally into, like, oh, that's what I have to do. That's what I need to become. That needs to be what I'm reaching for.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, it's interesting to think about too, because in many ways we've gone as a culture, not everybody, but a good part of the culture has moved in a direction so far attached from nature in of itself that when you get into nature, it's, like, confusing. Like, you're like, what the hell's going on here, right? and in a lot of ways, you can get a lot of benefit from being in nature in a very short period of time, but then you re-enter this other environment. So, like, it can also make working on yourself difficult by, like, coming into the things that are healing and awesome, going back to this, like, crazy environment. It's very challenging. It's distracting. I need this, like you were just saying. And then maybe you get back, and it's like, for me, a lot of people will ask, like, well, how long did it take you to, like, get these ideas about yourself, about self, about people, about whatever your philosophy on life? Like, fucking almost 41 years, man. Like, it's taking a long damn time. Like, this didn't happen overnight. You know what I mean? Like, I've been working very intentionally on this stuff for, like, the last 15 years for sure. But I can say to somebody like, go get into nature. But if you're only going to get into nature for a couple, like one day or on a weekend and then go back to your environment for fucking a month straight, that's distracting and full of noise. Like, you're not going to find the stuff you're looking for. Like, there's a commitment and there's a consistency to it. There's like a dedication and discipline to it too, to reach these states of consciousness so that you can be creative in other environments and see clearly of like what things are. Look past our concepts to see the truth behind things. So my connection to nature that's one of the reasons why I moved back to where I was, Phil, honestly. It was like, because there's where I was living in Citrus Heights, in Roseville area near Sacramento. Mm-hmm. I'd go into my backyard and there's like a tract home complex that they put up real fast in like the early 80s or late 80s or whatever. But before that happened, there's, in Orangevale, there's all these different, in Citrus Heights, there's all these like large like farm tracts of land before these things went up, before the expansion happened. So I go into my backyard and there's one of these larger tracts of land right behind the community, and they put like this 10-foot tall, 12-foot tall razor wire fence across the back end of our property, like our small little lot. And every time I looked out the window, every time I went in the backyard, I felt like I was in jail.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck this place, man. I can't. Yeah. And I'm not trying to downplay or say in a negative way that those environments are all bad. Like, there's a lot of people that live very successful lives and still get into nature or whatever. But for me, in those moments, it was very confining and distracting. And so I had to come back to nature. So now I can walk outside my back door and I'm like in nature, man, like straight away. And I do think that the job helps in a lot of ways. Like, it gives you a big, I'm working with the land. Like, fighting fire is like, especially wildland fire, like, I can't think of another job where you're trying to actively control Mother Nature.
Yeah.
Like, Mother Nature is going to kick your ass all the time, right?
Yeah.
So it gives me this very beautiful opportunity, right, through many failures, to actually, instead of fighting fire, and this kind of sounds silly or whatever, but I dance with fire.
Yeah.
Like, I'm with fire.
Yeah.
I can't fight fire. That she's going to bite me every time I try and do that. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna work with her. I'm gonna listen to the science. So I'm constantly in the outdoor environment, like reading the signs, right? Like being way more connected versus this aggression. You know what I mean? Of like, we have to have this success, operations, mission, like all this stuff. Like, let's take a step back and let's see exactly what she's telling us. And to me, that's such a beautiful way to live a life, honestly.
That's powerful, awesome.
Man. I'm just curious when your book comes out.
It has to.
Oh my God. I've tried writing a book like a million times, dude. Like, let me tell you, I have like endless like notebooks.
Well, that's why I said when, not if.
Yeah. Give me a few years. I'm gonna have to send it to an editor to like make it for me, maybe. But yeah, that's something on the books too.
Yeah.
I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat. Like, I have a lot that I've gone through over my life, and I'm like, I still don't really share my story or talk about it. And I'm like, man, at some point I need to figure out how I want to go about that. I love digging into other people's stories and like digging into their message and like, what have they gone through? And the more you do that, you're like, oh geez, like, stories can be powerful. What about what we've gone through? Mm-hmm. Like, how can we use our message even when we're in our platforms? And I'm like, but it's a whole nother beast. Like, digging into your story is great. Okay, that's easy to do. We can ask you all the questions. You tell us all the hard stuff. Then it's that whole like self thing of, that's hard to do to yourself. Digging in and really becoming vulnerable and sharing. So sometimes I think it's even harder to do that than to be the one asking the questions.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying with like podcasting and like, you have all these things that call to you, and it's easy in certain moments to have the wrong perspective and be kind of like overwhelmed by that. But I think the more healthy thing, and what I've heard from you and also from you, Matt, is being inspired by that and knowing and being patient and saying, I know it'll come. We know that book needs to happen. I swear after this conversation, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm like, I want to read your book, man. I want these, documented. I want these concepts and these ideas in a form that I can hold. So be inspired by that and know that that is coming in the future and not be overwhelmed by it, I think is the key.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally the key. Like, don't be overwhelmed by anything. It doesn't matter, man.
Yeah.
Like, in a lot of ways, time is a concept, man, still.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, it's what happens after this. I mean, the physical body goes away. But you do enough psychedelics, like, you can start to understand that time's a concept. So, like, at the end of the day, like, it's, you know, I think it's good to know, like, just be inspired by what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just let it happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just let it happen. And the exposure and talking about who you are and the things you've done actually is really fucking cool. Sometimes as men, we try and think that it's like it's gonna show some kind of weakness. Like, nah, man, it's not weakness, dude. It's actually very much strength.
Yeah.
So I encourage, when it's time for you to share it, I think you should do it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And man, we've had a good conversation. I was just looking at how long we're at. An hour 45 minutes.
That's a record for us.
Nice.
Yeah, appreciate it. You definitely, you speak well. You have a great message. I think with what you're trying to do now, I think it's definitely going to be very impactful. Maybe if you would actually just re-summarize like what it is you're doing now. So you've got your company that you're looking to kind of do more of. You're consulting with businesses. Like, tell us a bit about what's the current and upcoming future that you at least know about so far.
For sure. Yeah. The thing, so I have a LLC called Moment Consulting LLC. It's not your standard consulting company that like a corporation would think of, right? It's more in line with consulting with individuals, teams, groups of people, whatever, organizations, to inspire self-leadership.
Yeah.
Through the art of me working as this and leading people in some very, very challenging situations, I've come to understand that it's all bullshit if you can't lead yourself first.
Yeah.
And so I'm very interested in that. I've had some beautiful opportunities to do some public speaking along these terms, a lot actually, like what we're doing now.
And even with those sessions, like with the consulting piece, if you don't mind, I just want to ask on that too. What does that normally look like? So if there's a company that wants to work with you on their leaders or something, are you going out to a business? Is it a workshop? Are you doing days of consulting? Is it virtual? What do you actually do with it?
Yeah, some of it's been virtual so far. It's mostly been like large scale public speaking.
Okay.
Like on a stage talking like this to people. Workshops are for sure an option as I get everything built up, but it's all been word of mouth too, which has been crazy. Like we were talking about like the success coming in. Like I've built a crappy website that's like slowly getting rebuilt right at the moment. And from there it's been word of mouth and it's been fairly successful. So which has been great. So that's sort of in the background, kind of working itself out, which I'm super stoked on. And then I have a podcast that's going to get launched here fairly shortly, which it's going to be all about this. It's going to be called A Moment with Ben Strahan, where I get to express and talk to people like yourselves exactly like we just did about things like this.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. And a nonprofit's also coming here pretty soon, where I will be utilizing the funding to help first responders experience alternative healing methods, whether that's the ayahuasca journey in the jungle or like just some therapeutic stuff that, you know, isn't covered like in an insurance or something like this. Yeah. But I want to be able to offer some of these things because I've had an immense amount of healing from a lot of these alternative healing methods. Awesome. And that's pretty much the top three right there amongst all the other crazy ass things I do. But that's great. Business wise, that's where I'm expressing myself creatively.
Awesome. What, being that some of them are still kind of in development, what's the best way for us and others to follow what you have going on?
For sure. Well, Instagram is like the platform you're going to see me active the most on. Cool. So it's just Ben Strahan, at Ben Strahan. And then you can always email me at ben@momentconsulting LLC if people are interested in that kind of stuff, this type of conversation type of thing. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Awesome. Great. Well, any more thoughts, questions?
No, it's been awesome, man.
Well, again, thank you very much for taking your time to meet with us, share your story. Again, I feel like we could probably start over and have a whole second conversation. So I'm sure it won't be the last time we interact with you.
My pleasure, you guys. Thank you so much for having me and letting me hold this space with you guys. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. If you or someone you know is currently in crisis or struggling with mental health challenges, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a mental health professional or a helpline in your country. Remember, you are not alone, and there are resources available to provide assistance. The phone number to the U.S. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 800-273-TALK. That's 800-273-8255.